Welcome to this video on business impact analysis. To continue our conversation about business continuity, we are going to focus on business impact analysis now. Now, what that is, it's a way to understand the impact that you are likely to have on your organization if a critical business function is disrupted or if a disaster hits. So you might see this called a business impact assessment as well. There's basically the same thing. It's the formal process of how we would analyze business processes, take a look at our assets and understand the impact if they were to be disrupted or if we experience some kind of disaster. The other thing this helps us to do is identify our most critical functions, the most critical processes, assets, resources, all those different things that comes into play with business continuity. BIA is designed to figure out what you need to keep your business up and running if something bad happens. And in the business continuity flow of things, remember that we already talked about the project scope and planning. Now we have the business impact analysis. We will continue the conversation with continuing planning and then wrap everything up with approval and implementation. So we are going to focus primarily on the impact analysis or the impact assessment. Above anything, the critical business functions, that is what we are focused on, is called CBF. That is everything within the business impact analysis. What it is, it's all of different activities that we needed for the business to remain up and operational and also to remain compliant. We often forgot this as part of the business continuity, where we are really focused on keeping the business going, but really compliance is another aspect of it. If we are in a medical sector, if we are in a financial sector or government sector, compliance is just as critical as maintaining business operation. So we never should forget that part when it comes to business continuity. So some examples of things like that. Critical business functions are identification and authentication. Web services, especially if you are hosting websites like an e-commerce website or something like that, and also cloud-based services. If you are Amazon Web Services, if you are VMware, if you are Google, if you are any of these big vendors, they host a lot of cloud-based services. So those are their critical business functions. And really the whole point of it all is to determine the business resiliency and also the contingency planning strategy that's going to be needed to keep the business up and running. So the result from this will determine how critical the business system is to be supporting the business or the mission, whatever you are doing, and also the impact of loss that could be experienced from disruption or a disaster. Now within the business impact analysis, primarily what we are going to do is risk assessment. That's why you also hear it called business impact assessment, because we will do a risk assessment. Now we are gonna focus on risk assessment in this video. There's another video specifically dedicated to this, but this whole idea behind it is to determine the probability and impact of threat event in relation to an asset. So we are looking at threats against our asset, whether it's personal, whether it's system component, an application, whatever that might be. There's two ways that we would go about that. One would be qualitative approach, where we have a ranking system, a category system, something like that, quickly predict the risk probability against the different threats and also the assets. The other way is quantitative risk assessment. This is where you are gonna use numbers, or really you are gonna use money to calculate your risk. So you are gonna look at the value, the monetary value of your assets, and then evaluates that against the threat to determine what the potential loss of monetary value would be. Now this risk assessment will help you to identify the critical and the high risk organizational asset, where you maybe have a server that maybe cost around $10,000. Now You might have a server cluster that cost around $2 million. Now, you know that's a critical assets that need to be protected. So this is gonna help us narrow the focus of the BIA. So again, we will learn more about risk assessment in a later video, but just know that risk assessment are frequently used as a part of business impact analysis, so, or the business impact assessment. Now, as a part of BIA, we have what's called measure of impact. This is how we calculate what happens if an asset goes down, and it all starts with the maximum tolerable downtime. If we experience a failure, some kind of disruption, a disaster, whatever it might be, the maximum tolerable downtime is the length of time that we can go without the critical process or the critical assets. So this is the maximum time we can allow it to be down before it start impacting our business. You also have the recovery time objective or RTO. This is a plan effort necessary to restore the critical process or the critical assets. And then we have RPO, which is recovery point objective. And this is a point in time in which the system can be recovered to restore operation. And really what we are talking about is risk tolerance, to determine how long the organization can be without this thing. And then we also need to account for how long it is gonna take us to get it back up and running, and at the what point do we need to restore it to get it back up and running for operation. And that's what the measure of impact are all about. So let's take a look at an example of this. Looking at authentication servers, how long could we go without our authentication service being online? Well, let's say for argument sake it's 60 minutes. We can go for 1 hour without being able to authenticate into the system. That's because administrator need to get into the system, developer needs to get into the system, maybe user needs to get into the system, maybe your Shopify website or your some kind of e-commerce website. Authentication is what allow your customer to get access to their account and purchase things from you, right? So how long can you go before you start seeing an impact to your business? In the terms of say an Amazon or eBay or a overstock.com, it's 0, right? You always want your customer to be able to log in, but for us, let's just say it's 60 minutes. Okay, this expresses kind of in a business sense in total length of time that this server can be down or unavailable without causing any harm to the business. Now what about recovery time objective? So how long will it take to restore this authentication servers? And you always want to look at this from the worst case scenario. If we had to restore this server from scratch, build them all, what would it take to do so? Now you can imagine there's a lot of things that goes into the equation. Whether maybe you are automatic your infrastructure, maybe you have continuous integration, a continuous development pipeline, and you are doing kind of DevOps things where you can just spin it up real quick, or maybe you are building this from scratch. They are actual physical server that you have to install the Microsoft Windows operating system and then build your domain controller and all the different stuff. So you have to take all of that into account when you calculate this time. So for argument sake, let's say our recovery time objective is 30 minutes. If those server goes down and we have to restore them back to operational state, it's going to take us 30 minutes. Then what about the recovery point objective? This is really what it demonstrates is the maximum allowable data loss for an event like this. So what you do is you would look at say your last backup. Whenever your last backup was, that's what you wanna restore to. That's the recovery point objective. The point in time in which the represents solid baseline, a solid data set, whatever it might be, that's outlined in your business continuity policy or your business continuity plan. Normally what you are looking to do is to go to the latest backup. So maybe yesterday backup, maybe you didn't backup until 2-3 days ago. So you restore from that backup and you restore the data set on the new authentication server. Now, a really good resource for this is NIST Special Publication 834. This is contingency guide for Federal Information System, and I got this image from the particular slide. So as you can see, you have your own processes over here on the left and your stakeholder. Again, as part of the planning and the scope, your stakeholder are gonna provide input to all of this. So maybe in this case, they are looking at it. How do we process our invoices, right? Sales, how we are doing that? What about the reports? How about the create our budget? What about if we have customer service need? How often are we responding to inquiries, right? So if you look at it, you have your processes here and then you have your potential impacts. This is the risk. This is the risk. If you cannot process invoice, what is the risk? Well, more than 1000 staff members are gonna be affected here. So what our maximum tolerable downtime for this? Well, our invoice processing can be down for 72 hours. After that, business is going to start being impacted. Now, all of the stuff to the right, you have your FIPS 199, which are your impact level and that kind of stuff. That's really not relevant for what we are talking about here. What we are focused on in the processes, the critical business functions, again your max tolerable downtime, and then you can see your recovery time objective right here, which in this case to recover the application server that hosts these invoices. It's gonna take 3 full days to recover. So that's a huge amount of time to recover the process. So what do we do in that regard? Well, this is truly critical business function. If it takes it that long, maybe we need to look at some more security controls, right? So that's what the business impact assessment or the business impact analysis, that's what it is all about. Going through all these things, laying out all these processes, understanding the times and the time frames that's gonna take for one recovery, and how we are gonna recover, and that will help you to understand where your risk really lies. So again, this is all based on your tolerance level. What is the risk tolerance? And everyone has a different tolerance level, right? Okay, so the bottom line for the business impact analysis is you need to understand the purpose of it, you need to understand the critical business function and how to identify those, and then you want to know all of these measures of impact.